Mark Robinson, the Senior VP of Business and Legal. Larry Mistel, Primary Wave. Colleen Rice, the COO of the Orchestra.
Welcome to our second class this semester. Appreciate you all being patient and coming. You know, I always like to point out that the entertainment industry, specifically the music industry, is a business based on relationships. You never know who you're going to meet on the way up, on the way down, on the way walking down the street, in the door. In fact, an executive, Danny Goldberg, wrote a book called Bumping Into Geniuses. That's not always the case, but you just never know who you're going to bump into. And when I was in between jobs, I was trying to figure out what I could do, and I was very blessed at the time to have a young entertainment music lawyer who helped me secure a job. But he had a lady friend who was running around all the time, and he introduced me to her, and you know, I didn't follow my own advice, paying attention, and that young woman is our guest tonight. Her name is Kate Hyman. She works at the music company BMG. She's a vice president of A&R and creative, which means not only does she find musical talent, but she also finds songwriters and publishing assets. And then because she's one of these creative minds that just doesn't singularly vibrate like that, which has a mind that doesn't singularly just focus on areas like she's got books, and she's acquired some film bios and things like that. So it does a lot of different things. But what you will find fascinating is her career and the different things and lives and people over the years that that she's touched and has worked with. It's pretty fascinating because it covers all genres, it covers many periods of music, some that you know of and some that probably predate you, and some that are current. But so just to, you know, let's be currentisms for a moment and talk about some of the artists that she's now involved with. Danger Mouse and Karen O have a project coming together that she's very excited about. Perry Farrell, you might be familiar with him, I'm sure. She's worked with recently with the Flaming Lips, Nathaniel Ratcliffe and the Night Sweats. I'm sure you're familiar with, I would hope you are. Amy Mann, Paula Cole, Henry Rollins. There's a Mercury Rev project that she was involved with. Even you know, going into other genres, worked over the years with Toots and the Maytals.
Moby, I forgot to put Moby down there.
Very much responsible in one of her positions is discovering and helping launch Moby's career. And this spring, you guys, you'll look back at this class and go, oh yeah, she told us about that. So you may be familiar with, or maybe it predates a lot of you, but how many of you have heard of T-Rex? No? Okay, well,
Do you know the song Bang a Gong? Yes. Okay, well that's T-Rex.
Okay, well, all right, so, you know, unfortunate that the gentleman known as T-Rex had an untimely death and left a pretty extensive catalog of songs. In fact, Elton John was in one of his incarnations, and actually if you Google a video, there's Elton playing piano for T-Rex. Anyway, point being that there's going to be a compilation with a lot of contemporary artists doing cover versions of T-Rex songs on a compilation, and that's one of Kate's many current projects. I guess shortly after I met her at the same time, she worked at a very art-driven label called Z Records, which was run by a very wealthy French guy, Michael Zilka. I think he made his money in oil or something.
His father owned Mother Care in England, which was like owning Walmart or something, and
So
he started a small label, and his dad hated the fact that he wanted to be in music, and he signed the strangest bands you've ever heard at the time. And
but he had a big hit with Kid Creole and the Coconuts.
Yeah, and he had Suicide.
Record.
He had bands that you might not have heard of, but he had bands that sawed through stages and destroyed the electricity in the buildings, and was really a punk rock guy of that era. Yeah.
And then I guess you moved on to MCA Records, which is now morphed into Universal, and she survived working there for a very powerful gentleman some of you have heard of, Irving Azoff. And then Chrysalis Records, which unfortunately doesn't exist as a standalone situation anymore, but they had an amazing little repertoire for an independent label. They had Sinead O'Connor, the Waterboys,
Blondie,
Pat
Billy
Benatar.
Idol, Pat Benatar, yeah.
So these were some of the artists that worked there. Then you're all familiar with, I'm sure, the name Virgin Records. Yeah. So when Richard Branson sold Virgin Records, like many of us, he's got the disease where he can't stay away. And so he decided, let's start a new label called V2. And lo and behold, who did he hire to work there? Kate. And that's where I think Moby first.
Yeah, in fact, that started out of my loft, because he's smart enough to say, why hire promotion, marketing, and sales when we don't have any records yet? So he hired an A&R staff and a publisher
Now,
out of my loft, and then we moved on to build the company.
so now, this is where she's going, and in the middle of all this, she decides to become a mom and has a child.
I didn't forget.
I think she took a moment off to be a mom and then bounced back to work at Warner Brothers. Now she's been at BMG for quite some time.
8 years.
So what I thought would be helpful is this semester we wanted to talk to powerful women executives in the music entertainment business and share with you their success stories, and then, you know, as a sidebar to that, the difference of working in a business that is very male-centric, testosterone-filled, and yet you can be successful, so that any of you people, both male or female, need to know what it was like, and moving forward, understand the opportunities that are there and have always existed and continue to exist, but maybe some of the trials and tribulations along the way that you might have to deal with or not. But I just want to give everybody a reality perspective, so that when you leave these hallowed halls and go out into the real world, that you'll have an understanding and some sort of background to say, okay, done that, been there, heard about that, so that, you know, where they say those who don't study history are destined to repeat it. And I'm not encouraging anyone to follow that or not, but I'm just saying I want to give you the tools and the information that will allow you to make your own decisions in a realistic way. So I learned some things in the traffic tonight that I didn't know. So you were born in America, but spent a lot of time as a youngster?
I grew up in England and lived there until I was 18, and then came back to go to college to Berkeley in California to study archaeology and dead languages, which clearly is not where I ended up. Yeah. And And my family were all in the entertainment business, but the film business. And my grandfather had a company called Seven Arts, which bought Warner Brothers from Jack Warner when I was a little girl. And so my dad made movies, like Lolita, The Dirty Dozen, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, all these different films. And eventually he got tired of it and sold Warner's to the Kinney Corporation. They were they owned parking lots. And the owner was Steve Ross.
And funeral homes.
And funeral homes as well. They knew nothing about film. And which was part of the reason that my family left, was because much like the music business changes, the film business was changing, and writers were not given the credit they deserved. Directors' movies were taken away from them and edited without their permission or overview. Things were happening as they do in the entertainment business, where a lot of the creative people lost control to the business side, the business folks. And to a certain degree, that is relevant to what we're talking about, but it is a different industry. But they're connected so much now.
So when your family learned of your interest in wanting to get involved in the entertainment industry, what was, we all have parental stories to share. What was yours?
My father said to me I wasn't allowed to get into the film industry.
Because?
Because at the time, people in the film industry were crooks posing as gentlemen, but at least he would allow me to get into music, because at that time there were gentlemen posing as crooks. So that's what I took on board. And at the time that was sort of the case, but very quickly changed, where there were definitely crooks involved. The mob were involved in both of those businesses in a big way, when it came to selling records and when it came to making films.
So you went to school on the West Coast. How did you get back east?
It was a little bit circuitous. I started work at a label called Shelter Records as a summer job.
Which was based where?
It was based in Hollywood, on Hollywood Boulevard, because my father told me that I had to make some money, and digging wasn't doing it. So I worked there for a while, and I fell in love with this record that came out at the time, which was a record called Broken English, which I'm sure none of you have heard, but you should listen to if you get a chance. It was very ahead of its time. And it was by a woman called Marianne Faithfull. And I just thought anything was possible at this age. I really had no fear. As you do at a certain age, you're just like, well, I'm going to follow my dream, and it's going to work out. And sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But I had some connections to the producer of the artist, and I managed to find out where she lived. I'd never met her. So I went to London and knocked on her door and said, I want to work for you. And she said, who are you? And I gave her my name, and she said, go off and read 3 books. They were French classic novels. One was Madame Bovary, one was Liaison Dangereuse, and one was Nana by Emile Zola. And come back. So I biked away, I bought the books, I read them, came back, and moved into her home and that day, and became her assistant manager. And that was it. So those are the kinds of things that can happen if you ask. It's a really interesting business. It's not one where one can be shy. I mean, for example, yesterday I was standing outside my building. Oh, well, then I went back to New York after that. After spending some time with her, I decided I wanted to go to New York and work in the business there, and met Steve's friend, who was an attorney and a very successful one, and he helped me get a job at MCA Records. No, Z and then MCA. So that was also connections, and the love of music. And I was a total punk. I was like, anything that was well known, I hated. And anything that nobody had ever heard of, I thought was brilliant. And that's all that mattered to me, was that I was there first. And that's kind of how you start to get into A&R, is having that real desire to discover whatever's new. There are different kinds of A&R, but that's how I got into it, was I wanted to discover something unique, different, new, and that I thought would be successful. Sometimes that worked out, sometimes it didn't. But, you know, it worked out most of the time.
So who is so once you became a bona fide A&R or talent scout person,
Yeah.
what do you recall being your first encounter, or maybe it's not success, maybe it was, but what would be the first thing that you could say, I signed, or I was involved in getting signed?
Boy, I knew you'd ask that.
Sorry. Don't like being predictable.
No, it's just because I was trying to remember, and actually it was a pop act, and it was this woman who I was not a pop girl. I was very much an independent person, and so there was this pop act that Irving Azoff and I wanted to sign. Her name was, I can't remember her name, so I'm going to give you...
So this was at MCA?
This was at MCA Records. But what I really remember signing first was Henry Rollins and Black Flag. I don't know if you know who they are, but they're like the quintessential punk rock band back then.
Now that would be at Imago, yes?
No, it was before that. It was earlier as well.
Where?
At Chrysalis.
Chrysalis.
But at MCA, I signed a band called Breakfast Club, and here's one you really have to watch out for, because the drummer in Breakfast Club was a woman called Madonna, and she was a terrible drummer. So I told the band to get rid of the drummer, and the replacement was a guy called Stephen Bray, and Stephen Bray ended up writing, apart from this guy Jelly Bean Benitez, he ended up writing Madonna's hits. So actually they ended up having a #1 record, Breakfast Club,
Yeah.
and also Steve Bray went on to be the hot producer of that time. But I also had the unfortunate experience of having to have her as a roommate, because I was poor at the time. And she would wake up very early in the morning singing her songs very loud. She took all of my food out of the fridge because she thought it was crap, and filled it with health food. And she drove me crazy, so I had to kick her out. So that's the Madonna story. You never know. You just never know.
Have you had any encounters with her in subsequent years?
With her?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And does she recall fondly those memories?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We are complete friends, and I'm still very much in touch with most of the artists that I've worked with. I'm very lucky in that we still have very, very good relationships, which is not that. I mean, it can happen once in a while, but oftentimes, if their career is not happening or whatever, they first blame their manager, and then they blame their record label. So we have maintained friendships, but one of my mentors told me once, it was a really important piece of information, do not assume that these people are your friends, the artists, because that can happen, and I have some very close friends that I've worked with as artists over the years. But if you consider them to be your friends, you cannot deal with them in a way that you have to sometimes, which is to disagree with them. That's part of your job. It's to tell them when you, in a nice way, or not, when you feel that they're going in the wrong direction. In the end, it's their decision as an artist. It's always their decision. Would never, I mean, it's their lives. But you cannot do that if you have that friendship on a certain level. It's too deep, because then they consider you someone who they don't really listen to. So you have to have that line. I don't know if you agree with that, but
no,
it's something
I
that's
think
very important.
I think that's true. You mentioned one of your mentors. Who do you consider some of your mentors?
I was extremely lucky in a business where I started, where women were secretaries. If there was a woman in the room, even if she, you were allowed to be a publicist, a secretary, or a publisher. Those were the only jobs available to women. And even if you had a title, you were still required to go get coffee for the men. Now, I never had a problem with that, and to this day, I always want coffee, so I ask if anybody else wants some, so it's not an issue. But, what was the question again?
Who would you consider some of your mentors?
Mentors. So I had really male mentors, and one female who gave me really interesting advice. Her name was Karen Berg. She was an amazing, really incredible A&R woman, one of the few. There was a woman called Nancy Jeffries, there was Karen Berg, there were very, very few. And when I got to New York and wanted to have another job in A&R, I went to speak with her, and she said, "I'm not going to help you." And I was like, why won't you help me? And she said, "Because I want you to have a great life."
Wow.
So what she meant was it was very difficult for women at the time to
But she was one of the...
achieve.
They were both very successful
Extremely
executives.
successful.
And I know Nancy now works for McCartney and runs his publishing company.
Yes, and sadly Karen died. But they were very, very few women, and they had to fight like hell.
And Nancy started, if I'm not mistaken, in a rock band that put out an album. So
yeah,
she had a very interesting trajectory there.
She certainly did. And then she worked for John Cage, the kind of crazy composer, for a while. She was an amazing woman.
Still is, yeah.
Yeah, I hadn't seen her in a while, but the last time I saw her, she looked just the same, and she was the same. Very kind. But then the other two mentors were men. One of them was a man called Denny Cordell, who started the label Shelter Records, and was called Shelter because he produced Procol Harum and the Moody Blues. I don't know if you know who they are, but they were hugely successful. He was living in England, and he had to move because of taxes. They were, in England at the time, you had to pay like 99% of your income as tax. So, literally. So, he moved to America and started a company called Shelter, as in tax shelter. And he really, really taught me the ropes and was respectful. I started as his secretary, and this was my first job. I started as his secretary and was fired within 2 weeks because I didn't know how to type. At the time it was typing, which it still is on a computer. So I would take home all the work and do it at home and then pretend to type at the office. So he figured me out. And about 2 weeks later, he rehired me as an E&R person. So sometimes it's good to be bad. So there was him, and he really, really helped me through many years of dealing with tough situations. As a woman, just being sort of diminished, not demeaned, but diminished in terms of what you had to offer. And then my other really great mentor was a guy called Seymour Stein from Sire Records, who signed so many huge bands. All the British bands that came over in the 80s, I suppose.
Yep. Yeah.
From New Order to, I mean, he was the one who went to England to look for talent because that's where it was coming from at the time. But he also signed Madonna. He signed, God.
Well, the whole CBGB scene.
Everything.
Was,
Talking Heads.
Ramones.
The Ramones. He was...
Television?
Television, who, by the way, I look after now, just picked up Tom Verlaine and trying to get him to make a record, which is really interesting.
I'm sure.
No more free dinners until he makes a record. So he really introduced me to everybody. Like, he took me, and every dinner he went to, every meeting he had, even though I wasn't working for him, ever, he would call me in and have me sit with him. And I never worked for him. And he took me out and introduced me to all the attorneys, the really big ones, all the managers. I was really blessed. I mean, he saw this young girl, and for some reason he saw something and was a mentor. And I think that's something that is really sad and that's missing right now, and it may be a cultural thing. And it may be because the music business is kind of iffy and it's changing a lot. So there's fewer jobs to be had at companies. I feel like, and this is just my opinion, people are a little greedy with their information. You don't want to share it because they don't want to lose their jobs. And that's really sad. I think mentorship is huge. You're not going to learn, and you also need to learn that you can make mistakes and be allowed to make them and not get fired, because that is how you get better and better and better. And culturally, in America in particular, I think, maybe not, there is a sort of success is everything. And you're in college, and I'm sure you understand that from what you're doing now. You know, a teacher hardly ever says, you just got a really bad grade. Let me explain why. And this is good. This is teaching you something. It's all about being first. And that's not what it's about. It really isn't. It's about learning from mistakes. It's the best way to learn. And having somebody guide you that you trust and that cares about you, kind of takes you. And I was very lucky in that none of these guys took advantage of me in any way, which was happening all the time, a lot of the time. And I was in situations like that. So.
You said people are, you used the word diminished. So could you cite an example that you're comfortable in talking about how a female executive or employee might be diminished?
Oh, I can do it from last week.
Okay.
We don't have to go backwards.
Okay.
Although I'll start with a situation where I went for a job interview when I was pregnant. And I walked in, big bump, and the guy said, "I'm so sorry." He looked at me and he said, "I'm so sorry, I double booked." Walked out. Another interview, this guy had all these children.
Wait a minute, so how do you respond to that?
I wouldn't have wanted to work for him anyway, so I just left. I wasn't going to spend any time, thinking about that one.
So that was the end. I mean, you didn't go back and say anything
God,
to anybody?
no. But there was another one where this guy had all his children lined up on his desk with his wife at home, looking after them, and the nanny, because he was making a fortune, God knows why. And, sorry, I don't want to sound bitter, but this is the reality. And he asked me if I wanted to have kids, and I said yes. Once again, he looked at his watch and said, damn, I got another meeting. And I wasn't imagining it. This was all about women not being allowed to have kids, or even being married sometimes. It seemed women who are really great multitaskers, it was not okay. One of the worst things that happened to me was a good friend of mine at Capitol Records. He was working there, so I'm giving you a little hint. Called me in for an interview for a job. I got there, and he said, hey, you're my bud, so I'm going to tell you the truth. I'm like, what? And he goes, we're not giving this job to a woman. But legally, we have to interview a certain number of women. So I'm just letting you know that you don't have the job. Sorry if I wasted your time. That one, I got up, I turned over his desk, and I walked out. So yes, I did react to that one.
Well, need to hear those stories. People need to know that.
And what happens now, and then I don't want to be negative the whole time, but it's important for you to understand what you have to deal with, and you can get through it, because if you really love what you're doing, that's what you focus on. And if you have self-respect, one can turn it around and just be sad for these people, that they are not self-realized enough. What happens often with women in meetings, where I work right now, they have executive meetings. There's 33 men in a room, 2 women, and a woman will say something, nobody will say anything. The man next to her will say exactly the same thing, and the room will start applauding. So that happens on a meeting by meeting basis. So this is the stuff you have to be aware of.
This is 2019.
Yes. This is now.
So what do you do in that case?
I say, excuse me. You just repeated what I said. I'd like some respect. So that's what I say.
And what is the response?
Really uncomfortable, and including women, some of the women, although afterwards they come and say thank you, because I think it's my job as an older woman to help, this not happen for another generation, but also just to educate, because this is not men's fault in a way. This is so in the culture that I'm not a man-hater. I'm a feminist, but there's a difference. And it's a matter of everyone learning again, learning over how things should be working. But you have to speak up. And the sad part is, a lot of the younger girls who are just starting feel they can't speak up because they're worried about losing their jobs. And my advice is to really think about that, and in the appropriate time and way, even if it's taking the person aside afterwards, speak up. Do not tolerate it in any part of your lives. So that would be my advice. nothing's going to change if you don't respect yourself and ask for respect from others. And it's really interesting how so many of these guys apologize and are not aware. And you do not get punished. You really don't. At least not in my experience. The only punishment is when you don't say anything and you feel like about yourself. So, I'm sorry, I don't want to go on too much.
No, I think it's extraordinarily important, and unfortunately, not every person who comes into this environment is going to be as direct and as candid as you. So I didn't want to move on and talk about some of the more hardcore aspects of A&R and just sort of glance over this, because I think this is a very important issue and that you're kind enough to share. So I just wanted to see if there were any questions of the moment that had to deal with this issue, because I see a lot of heads bobbing up and down agreeing with you. I just want to see if there was any open-ended questions regarding this particular aspect of things before I moved on to another topic within the world of A&R. So I don't want to leave this as a dangling, open-ended conversation.
Yeah, please, if
So
you want
this
advice
is-
or you've been in situations, anything.
I just want to...
Even from the men, because it's uncomfortable for men too.
Go ahead.
When you were saying about mentorship and making mistakes, I totally agree when it's like this, for us right now in this generation, making a mistake is basically like labeling yourself an idiot.
Yeah.
Especially if you can't get it right the first or second time.
Right.
And I feel last week we had our guest speaker and she said about her intern. And she said that she would not hire, she really doesn't want to hire interns anymore, because she liked this intern. She proved herself very well during her internship, but then when she brought this intern on, she messed up. And so because of that, she has it's like a bad rap for all interns, or just internship at all in her company. Yeah, so she was. I'm not gonna lie, but she's not you. So I just want to know about, how do you feel about young college students making mistakes, or interns? Because yeah.
Very, very good question. Interns, first of all, there's rules. When an intern comes into the office, they're not allowed to be asked to get you lunch. They're not allowed to get you coffee. This is very strict. You're not to be given expenses to fill out. You're not to be given like personal things from your boss, whoever you report to, like getting their laundry or anything like that. Your job, their job as your mentor, is to teach you. And as an intern, if you make a mistake, their job is to explain what it is and help you not make that mistake again. So when I say she's a bitch, yeah, she's a bitch.
You're talking about BMG's rules.
No, these are specific rules for interns, and a lot of companies don't advertise that or follow it. I don't know if you're aware, Steve, but like at Warner Brothers, they did not train the interns at all. They gave them lots of busy work. But you're leaving college to work for pretty much nothing for a company. Why are you doing that? You're doing that to learn.
Right.
And it's their responsibility to teach you. And if you make why would you not make a mistake? It's your first job. And whatever it is, you can make a couple of mistakes. It's up to people to talk to you directly, and that's something that's very important anyway. When you work at a company, if there's any kind of an issue, it's your responsibility to bring it up right there, deal with it head on. Don't gossip with other people about it. Talk to the person directly, say, I have an issue with you, or can we resolve this? Can we go in a corner and talk in an office? Always deal at that point if you feel someone made a mistake, and stand up for yourself. But that is not acceptable. So I would say learn the rules. Like if you're going to be an intern, check it, do some research. Because there is a way to make that worth your while, everybody in this room.
Thank you.
Does that help at all?
Yes, a lot.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Yes. Go.
So at what point did you decide, like, did you always want to have a family? Were you ever afraid to do that because of the responses that you got when, when people would ask you, oh, do you want to have children, or do you want to get married? Like, was this ever a concern for you? And in one of my questions I wrote, also when you took time off of work, like, how did you feel about that? Were you nervous that you weren't going to have, like, something, Yeah, so I
Really good questions.
I think, by the way, it's illegal for in an interview to ask those kinds of questions.
No.
Yes, now.
They still do it.
They still, they still do.
But they're not.
They still do it, and you can't sue a record label unless...
Right.
Oh, it used to be... I was dating one of the top lawyers in the industry. He was U2's lawyer. And when the thing happened at Capitol, when the guy said, I'm only interviewing you because we have to interview a certain number of women, he said, do you ever want to work in this business again? When I said I wanted to sue.
Well,
So that's the way it used to be. Yes. So that's the way it used to be. Very much
But he
so.
wasn't saying it as a threat. He was saying it as a piece of advice. Saying, if you do this, you're probably going to have difficulty.
You're never going to get hired again. You're a troublemaker. So to answer your question, I never really thought about it. I was lucky. I was the girl who was the rebel, who was never going to get married. I was like a guy. I was sleeping around. I was having fun. I really did not want to settle down. Steve knows. I mean, I was just the wild girl. No, I never, Steve. No. No, that's not what I meant at all. But please, no.
No, it's fine.
But so basically, I really didn't think about it. I was having a blast, and the only reason I ended up getting married and having a child was I fell in love. So it really wasn't something I thought about. I mean, I was like seeing guys, and if they weren't right, I'd just toss them away and not waste time. And then I finally found a guy that I really liked, and we ended up having a kid. And I had my kid at the age of 45. And I never worried that I wasn't going to have a kid, which is probably why I had one, because I wasn't nervous about it. So that's that answer, which, is something. What I would say to you is, don't worry. If there's a guy out there and you fall in love, or a girl and girl, guy and guy, whatever, just don't worry about your career. Just go with it. Love's the most important thing. It really is. So when I had my child and was alone and, a little bit of, insecurity because my identity was in my job, a lot of it, I was terrified that I would never get hired again. Terrified. And I didn't know what I was going to do. And I had all these contacts. I was scared to call them. I was absolutely scared that they would have forgotten me within 2 weeks. That's the honest answer. But that's a personal thing. Everyone's different. But I'm just giving you the honest answer.
Anyone else? I'll move on to other portions of the A&R world. If we feel like there are any more dangling. Okay. So following up on that, Gina has a question here, was how has your position at BMG helped positively affect the way women in the industry are viewed?
Interesting. I am extremely active in feminist activities, I work with BMG, allows me to, we're putting on a concert with Caesar's Palace in September. It's a women's empowerment concert, so it's the older generation. Steve very kindly helped me get one of the artists who is incredibly influential. And it's about women empowering, teaching other women to have the strength to be artists when it was hard, when record labels used to say, I have my girl, because there was like, that was the way it was. And so we're doing that. And a lot of guys are getting involved, which is fantastic. I think that it helps in terms of the younger kids seeing that there's really no difference. It's all about talent. I think the contribution, everybody gives something different. And this may even sound a little chauvinistic, but there is an aspect of women where artists are very comfortable around them. They don't feel that threatened, and they feel protected, which it really does happen, depending on what kind of person you are. I think that it's, in terms of BMG, they need to hire more diversity. I mean, I will say that. And a lot of the companies do need more diversity. And it's something they really need to look at. Partially because in my job, we have a staff that looks for music, and actually at BMG it's very good because everybody's different. They don't duplicate. So I do something, and then there's a guy called David Stam who is a brilliant he puts co-writers together, absolutely brilliant. There's another guy who signs artists when they're already successful and spends big chunks of money. I sign artists when they're up and coming. That's what I like. There's every kind of music lover. So they're actually very, very well balanced. There's a woman who only does heavy metal, and she has created her own little empire. She's amazing. And at BMG, everybody helps everybody. We are a team. So if I can help an artist that you signed, or you as an artist, even though I wasn't your A&R person, I would help. Which is very, very unique and unusual for companies. Usually it's all like, this is mine, and credit and all that kind of stuff. And that doesn't exist, so it's a really fun place to be.
Okay.
On a nice note.
So Williams want to know if you think now is the best time for women to enter the industry, and what could be said to inspire women who are not sure as to whether they want to work in this industry?
I think it's a great time to enter the industry for women, partially because there's a bunch of men that are scared that if they don't hire enough women, they're going to get in trouble. It's a really interesting time. Women are getting a lot of opportunity because of the Me Too movement. So they're getting more opportunity than they were. It is working. And I think that people are getting more and more evolved, slowly. So I would go for whatever it is you're going for with full force, whatever that job is. But you really need to know what it is that your strengths are. And you can't just walk in entitled. There are women who have worked, not just women, guys, girls, worked at companies for a year in a position as an assistant, executive assistant, and within a year they go to their bosses and say, I now want to be A&R. And I ask them, what is that? And they say, finding artists. And I'm like, no, that's not what it is. That's 10% of what it is. Do you know how to make records? Do you know how to choose songs? Do you know the producers? Do you know how to talk to artists and make sure that they are going in the right direction? Do you know how to help them get on the right tours once they've made the records? Do you know how to inspire the rest of the company when things aren't going well to keep looking after that act and keep focus on that act? That is the other part of this whole job.
Kind of giving us a definition of what an A&R person is.
Yeah. And so for a kid to, in a year's time, say they're ready to do A&R, instead of asking questions and having the chance to do that and get ready, they're going to fail. And failure by their own hand. So I would say that patience is part of this. And learning is part of this, and then asking for something at the right time. And I see a lot of impatience. I see a lot of entitlement. And that makes for less interesting signings. It makes for, there's too much music out there already. And 90% of it is crap. So do we really want to put out more garbage in the world? Not really. So you have to know what you're doing. And some people can do A&R, or they think they can, and they discover they can't. You have to be honest with yourself. But if you feel that you have really good taste, that's half the battle. Because part of the job is to be absolutely convinced and secure in your own opinion. And listen to other people, but don't let, the only way you should ever sign a band is if you really can't live without signing them. If someone can convince you that it's not a good idea, then you really shouldn't be doing it. Like, don't ever bring something into a company unless you say, I will die if I don't get this. And don't say I will die too many times, because nobody will believe you then.
But it also can lead to being a very frustrating job, because your expectations and ambitions for that particular artist is such, and the marketplace may not necessarily be in sync with
the marketplace. Well, it can start at the label, where
right
promotion people
don't buy into it.
Don't buy into it, and often promotion people will
be their own A&R people.
Be their own. Well,
or try to be.
Jimmy Iovine once said, he was Interscope Records, if any of his promotion people ever
A&R to record.
A&R to record suggested a single, they were out the door. Now, I think that's kind of tough. I think there's an in-between there. But promotion people, some of them, tend to choose the one that sounds like everything else on the radio. And when something sounds like everything else on the radio, by the time it comes out, it just sounds like something else on the radio, and it's not going to be a hit. The big hits tend to be the ones that break ground. So you have to be very committed in that as well. And, you know, you're only given so many chances, like any other job, so you will be trusted, but you have to consider the money that you spend on signing an act. Think of it as your own money. That's the way I always try to think of it. Because $10,000 may not seem like a lot of money, but it sure is if it's your own. And I think that, just to go to another point, artists shouldn't be getting too much money in the beginning because the pressure on them is huge, and on the label or the publisher. And when it comes to picking them up, if they haven't done what you expect,
Yep.
the label won't pick them up because then they're further in debt when they give them the bigger advance next time round that's in the contract. So it's good to explain to artists that it's a loan, it's their money, and if they don't want the pressure, they should take less. And then you have to fight with, but the big problem there is the lawyers
Imagine.
and the managers. Because what they want to do, based on the success rate, is make their percentage, which is anywhere from 15 to 20%, and with lawyers they take 10%, mostly. They want to make as much of that as possible. So they are, to a certain extent, hurting their clients. And so that's something, as an artist, if there's artists in this room, they really need to consider that. It's a hard one because you really want to go for the big money. And the other side of it is, hey, it's so hard to be successful, why not take the money? So there's two schools of thought. But if you want a long-term career, you kind of want to stay with the same company. Is this working? So my advice is to really think about that. And your manager, if you are an artist, is the most important person in your life in terms of, not forget your family, but in terms of your career. They have to be on the same page as you, and you have to have these discussions with them and where they stand before you even think of working with somebody.
I wanted to throw another fact at you. When your first job was with Denny Cordell, who, very successful producer and music executive.
Never signed anything that wasn't successful. It's amazing.
He didn't always follow the path that Jimmy Iovine set, because my direct experience with him was he would actually take some demos or finished masters and play them for promotion people to get a vibe and a sense of where this was going or where it was not going. And under certain circumstances, find himself at opposite ends and sit down and evaluate the situation and do obviously what was right for the artist.
Exactly.
So, I think that
it varies.
But he was very unique.
Well,
in that
Denny
capacity.
Cordell actually wouldn't sign an artist or do any deals on certain days because he had a private astrologer.
Wow.
So he literally would not, if it was May 15th through like July something, he wouldn't do a contract. Even if it was an artist he would lose. He was that much of a believer in, I don't know, it worked for him, seemed to work. But that, he was kind of brilliant and very, very kooky, right?
And his legacy today, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the band The Cranberries. That was one of the last projects that he was involved with, and he wasn't sure, and he wanted to leave that as an indie band and leave it in a ma and pa situation. And he took some input and decided to let Island Records run with it, as it were, and it took off way beyond his imagination and his thoughts, and it showed his insight into things. The other artist he had, and unfortunately the record wasn't properly made by the producer, I think. The songs were there, but it didn't come through, was Glenn Hansard from The Commitments, who then had a band called The Frames. And
was in that movie that
Yes.
was huge. That's what broke him really, right?
And it's interesting, he brought the demos into the record company and said, this is going to be the next big thing, I'm signing this thing. And the demos were fantastic. I was all excited. And then when he hired the producer and he came with the record, it took a lot of the roughness and edge and passion. And Denny's philosophy was, I should never have played the demos for the promotion guys. So anyway, he was one of those legendary guys, you know.
Can I tell you a story that is going to sound like I'm a typical A&R person?
Of course.
Where we say things like, we signed that. But it is a true story. As I said, Denny was one of my mentors. I was working for Terry Ellis at Imago. He left Chrysalis. He was the Ellis from Chrysalis and started this company, Imago. He was British, very British, and didn't like Irish people. And I found the Cranberries. I flew him to Ireland to see them. He refused to sign them and called them potato heads, and said that the woman was short, fat, and ugly. And so I went to Denny and brought him the Cranberries and said, you have to sign them. And Denny's son, Barney,
Right.
was like, you've got to do this, you've got to do this, you've got to do this. But I'm like, if my boss is such an idiot, I'm going to go to my mentor and give this to him. Because there was this one song, da, 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 changing every day.
Linger?
Linger. That was the demo. And any idiot could have known that that was going to be a smash. There's times when you just, unless you're totally deaf, know when something's going to, it wasn't like you had to be a genius at all.
But to Mr. Imago's credit, and you know, and not to diminish the success, but you had to have a vision and see beyond, because they made a video of their first single, and the lead singer, not overly attractive, but she had really crooked, bad teeth. And when they showed us the video, they wanted me to bring it to MTV at the time. That was how you broke a band. Back then, believe it or not, MTV mattered. Yeah, it did.
It was YouTube.
It was, yes. So he said, we can't use this video when she smiles and they show close-up of her singing, and he made the company spend money and do a new video, but before that had proper dental work done to correct visuals of her teeth. And that's the vision he saw, and he was right. Now, whether the band ever appreciated that, so the title of the album was Everyone Else Can Do It, so why can't we? Sounds cocky, sounds arrogant. The record blew up and became multi-platinum, millions of copies sold. And coming back one day from an interview at MTV with the band in a taxi, yes, a taxi, said, well, I don't have to do that again. And I looked at the band and I said, what are you saying? Well, we did it. I said, no, but when your next song or record or video comes out, we'll go back. Well, why? We did it. Well, no. Everyone else, and they never, ever really understood until years later how fortunate and blessed they were to have received that one successful shot that took them to platinum status, and didn't understand that bands, like Fleetwood Mac, for God's sakes, took them a decade to have any level of success that allows them to play multiple nights at Madison Square Garden. But they didn't understand that because they were fortunate enough to have a smash that immediately reacted, and every radio station wanted to play it regardless of the format. So, you know, bands are people with particular perceptions and habits and things, and you got to remember, as she said there, you're talking with people about their lives. For you, it might be a song or a project. For them, it's their whole inner being and what they're here for. Anyway, I go to a question from Jade that what's something that working with artists has taught you that you wouldn't have known in a book or otherwise have been able to learn about?
Wow, these are great questions. Well, first of all, it's active. Reading a book is passive. So you follow the story. When you work with an artist, you create the story with them. And you have to work organically. You have to know when to break the rules. And quite honestly, anyone who tells you there are rules, watch out. Because we're not rocket scientists. We're not curing cancer. We're involved with music. It's supposed to be fun. And anyone who breaks the rules tends to be successful. So you learn that as you go. If somebody has a crazy idea in the middle of the night, the biggest mistake you can do is not to follow through on that crazy mistake. I mean, the crazy idea. If you make a mistake on a record, don't fix it. Because mistakes are beautiful in music too. They really are. That's where it comes from the heart and the soul. And I can often tell when somebody has gone to a certain music school. I will not mention the school. But I can tell because their music is perfect. That's not necessarily what a popular artist needs to be. They have to have their own personality and their own persona, and they're not in an orchestra. So they don't have to be perfect. Some of my favorite artists are completely imperfect in their way they sing, in the way they perform. They have personalities. But really, the question is the difference between learning from a book. You're learning from another human being. You're teaching each other. That's the fun of it, is that I'm not just trying to teach the artist, but I'm learning so much from them. And
but is there one specific thing that you learned that you carry forward? That someone taught you?
I think that every single person is different. So you cannot, oftentimes A&R people after a long time have a line and it's almost like a speech they pull out and you hear the same thing over and over. You can't do that. Every single situation is different. And I've learned that. And you have to really, really pay attention to who you're talking to, who you're dealing with, what they want, because it's, once again, their lives, not what you want. And really listen. That's what I've learned, is listen.
And, a follow-up question from Jade was, peeling back the curtain here, she wants to know, what are one things that you do every day to keep up to date with what's going on in the music industry? Is it a magazine? Is it a website? Is there a book?
I talk to everyone. I talk to everyone. I'm in the street talking to strangers. I'm the crazy woman. Yesterday, I joined, it was some sort of animal rescue. It wasn't the ASPCA because I already joined that. And I was talking to this guy and I was like, you look like a musician. He's like, I am. And so I gave him my email and he sent me his music and it was very good. So I'm putting together with some writers. I talk to people on the subway. I'm like, you look like a singer. I mean, sometimes they look at me like, no. But oftentimes you can tell. There's a charisma. Or if they say no, you say, well, you should be. It's really about talking to people, staying in touch. Of course, staying in touch with managers, staying in touch with the lawyers. I am not somebody who does a lot of research. Some people do. They do A&R by looking at views on YouTube, streaming, downloads, all that stuff. I will do that after I find something that I like. Then I will do the research, because I have to do that in order for the company, for me to fill out a request to sign the artist. I have to give them all that information. And then I'll basically just, all the kids at my kids' school send me music, like all of them. I mean, one of them I'm training to be an A&R person. She's 14. And in return, she gives me playlists every single week. And I've discovered JSOM, who I love, and all these different bands from her. And I listen to anyone who says they like something. I'll just listen to it.
But you also have a built-in source at home. You have a 16-year-old.
That's how, all her friends. I can show you playlists galore from the kids at her school that, teach me what is current. And
that's her secret sauce.
But the current is interesting, because I like current, but it has to be something to me that will continue to grow. And I'm not that interested in one song. And I know that sounds old-fashioned, but it's not interesting to me. It may be for someone else, or on my publishing hat. If I put that hat on, it's a different hat, because it's about the writer. But if you're talking about an artist, musician, it's current to me, but there's good music and there's bad music. To me, there's nothing in between. If it's mediocre, it's crap. So it has to stand out and be timeless. So current has to be timeless. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but it really does. And then there's also the fun of making a record that's going to last a couple of weeks, and it's really cool. So there's that side of it as well, which is really great. So there's so many different things that you can do. You can do them all. You can choose to just do that. Once again, there's no rules. But you have to know what you want to do. And go for it. Just don't think about it. Do it.
Alexander want to know, what was the greatest spark you ever saw in one of your artists that motivated you and made your job exciting and enjoyable as soon as you walked in the door? What was the motivator?
It's always the last one.
Ha.
I can't go back to the first one, because there's the last one. Because if it wasn't the last one, I wouldn't be doing this anymore. It has to be the last one. So it's this young band. I was telling Steve about it. They're not well known. They will be. And they're from Montreal. It's one guy who's called Suitcase Junket. And it's totally unique. And I walked into the room because I heard it out in the hallway. It was at a convention. I'm like, what the hell is this? And I just was glowing. I just felt that thing inside where it was like just heaven. I was listening to heaven. And that spark has happened many times over. But there wasn't the first spark was probably the first act I signed. I haven't signed anything where I didn't get that. So I'm sorry to answer it that way, but that's the reality.
That's fair. Okay, another secret asked about. Georgina wanted to know, how did you convince Beth Orton to release 20 years of her music?
I've been a fan of Beth's for a very, very long time. And I don't know how many people know Beth Orton, but her biggest record was probably Trailer Park. She's a British artist. Who asked the question in here? It was you. Wow. Are you a big fan?
I was listening to her after I was reading up on that article.
Oh.
So I was just wondering how were you able to? Because she doesn't seem like a person to do that in the first place, or her personality and her music.
It was all about our relationship. You either connect with somebody when you meet them or you don't.
So you
And
changed her mind.
she's an extremely eccentric, lovely person. One minute she's thinking it should be black, the next it's white, then it's blue, then it's green. She's very much with the weather. So you just, eventually she comes to what it is she wants to do. But Beth, it will take her a couple of years to make a record, for example, because she will experiment so much. But she loves her music. She's very proud of it. So she was happy to, she feels it's all still relevant. So she's happy to put it out. She's not like embarrassed by any of it. And she's somebody who experiments a lot. She can, because she knows how to do beats. She knows how to record. She has her own studio. So she can do it. But it does mean sometimes she needs somebody outside to sort of tell her when to stop putting the paint on the canvas. But I just let her go, let her loose. Sometimes that's your job, is to leave someone alone.
Just a follow-up question. So about she was always this eccentric person. Do you have artists that feel like their music is not relevant and that kind of stifles their career? And that's also your job to like bring them out of like that insecurity?
I don't have people who think their music isn't relevant, because I wouldn't sign them if they felt that way. They have to know who they are. I can help them show people who they are. Say maybe this is the way you show them that or express it. But it has to come from within you. I'm not a songwriter. I'm not a performer. But I can see a performance and say maybe you should change the set. Maybe you should sing that song with just a piano. Maybe you should, those kinds of things. Use a different instrument here. But some artists get writer's block. They start to feel insecure because their last record didn't do what it should. But it was a beautiful record, and they should be proud of it. So you have to remind them of that and encourage them. Or sometimes, well, they need encouragement. At that stage, that's what they need. And it's funny, just as an aside, people used to not be called artists. Albert Grossman, you know this? Albert Grossman, who managed Dylan and the band and all those people, he started calling Bob Dylan his artist. Before that, they were musicians. And the reason he started calling them the artist was to raise the money that they would get from labels, because it sounded more important. Just as an aside. I don't know, does that answer your question at all?
Yes, it does.
Okay, I want to make sure that,
Thank you.
okay.
So you were involved in one of the soundtracks you were involved with was for the film I Am Sam.
Yeah.
It was a bunch of Beatles songs that you assembled. So Nunzio's asking how the Beatles are well known for having complications when it comes to licensing their music for certain platforms. Could you describe some of the difficulties you faced in helping create the I Am soundtrack? I know we don't have all night, but...
Okay, this is a really good one. It was a Sean Penn movie. The director was this woman. She'd only made one other movie. This was all about Sean being autistic, and the only way he could communicate was through Beatles lyrics. So clearly we had to have Beatles music. I was called in by Andy Gershon, who was running V2, and he said, do you think within 10 days you can do a whole album's worth of covers of Beatles songs? And I said, yeah. Yeah. So literally stayed up for 10 days. Just made a list, called my favorite artists, and they all said yes. It was amazing. I asked Paul Westerberg from The Replacements, and he said no, and then woke up the next day and said I was up all night writing Beatles, doing Beatles songs. So even he did it. We had Pearl Jam, we had like a ton of different people. And going back to the question, the director, this is insane, the director had put the original Beatles songs in the movie. The movie needed to be, like, the stems, everything had to be put in the film within 10 days for the editing. They didn't realize that they had to go to the publisher and make a deal for the Beatles songs, and that it would cost millions. So this is how this record happened. They were so ridiculously naive. They thought they could do this, and then they were told they couldn't. They called all these labels, everybody said, you're crazy. We ended up doing it, and the record sold 1 million copies, and the movie was not a huge hit. But the movie promoted the record, which is very unique and very unusual. So that was an incredibly unusual project. But it tells you how you need to know what you're doing. That's what happened.
Great story. The question Nunzio poses.
Nothing's impossible.
Nunzio has another question. BMG's deal with Bella Union Records allows you to gain connections with many more established musicians, such as the Fleet Foxes. What other opportunities do you feel are available for you and your company in a joint venture?
Okay, we used to do a lot of joint ventures. I did the joint venture with Bella Union. We had the Fleet Foxes already, not through that joint venture. With Bella Union, the joint venture ended about a year ago on a very friendly basis because Simon Raymond, who was in the Cocteau Twins, who is Bella Union, his taste was such that everything sort of sounded like the Cocteau Twins, and it wasn't really something that would sell in the United States. And I just couldn't keep justifying selling like a couple thousand copies of each record. So it really just didn't work out, but we had a friendly handshake. We were doing a lot of JVs in the beginning because we were trying to acquire music. And JVs are very difficult in terms of them working out. They really are. We did a JV with a label called French Kiss, which was a really cool label. And that ended. We're still friends, but BMG was too big of a machine to be able to pay attention to things that weren't selling enough records. It's just the honest truth. Those artists also belonged on smaller labels. I mean, they needed the attention on a label that had 10 acts, and that they were given what they deserved and what they needed. You can get lost at a big company. So the answer is, in the beginning we did the JVs with some of the bigger companies, some of the smaller ones. The bigger ones tended to work, and they lasted a certain amount of time. That's on the publishing side. On the record side, we did some acquisitions. We bought Infectious Records, which was Corda Marshall, who's a truly talented A&R person. He's British. He signed Muse, Alt J. He's amazing. So we bought his company. We bought a company called Rise, which is a hard rock company. We bought Jason Aldean's label in Nashville called Broken Bow Records. We just acquired 2 brand new hip hop labels, JVs. But when I say JV, we own the majority. That's the way BMG works. But now we're kind of done. We're covered. And now the company is at a stage where we're growing our own music. So when you ask about JVs, there's often a time within a company. A brand new company will do JVs. After about 6 years, they won't. They'll stop.
What about your relationship with S-Curve?
S-Curve is in our office. They have their staff there. Rise as well. They've maintained their staff. The same with BBR. We haven't touched their staff.
They should know S-Curve. They may not know the label, but they'll know. You can mention some of the repertoire.
Well, Steve Greenberg, who's been around for a long time. I guess his first hit was "Who Let the Dogs Out?"
Yep.
Yeah. So that's how he made all his money, so he could start his own label. And he has a bunch of new young artists. Haley Knox is one of them, and
what's the male singer?
Yeah. I'm sorry, I can't remember.
Yeah, I'm basing on his name too. Yeah.
It's gonna drive me nuts now.
Well,
I'll have to look it up.
somebody can go Google S-Curve.
Yeah.
See the repertoires.
But there's a time thing with record labels. There just is. I don't know if you've noticed that, but there's a time when they'll do something and a time when they won't. And it's all about the growth of the company. So if you ever want a JV, go to a company with a lot of money that opened yesterday.
Point taken. Here's a question from Leonardo. Kind Heaven features producer Tony Visconti and musicians like Tommy Lee, Mike Garson, and Peter DeStefano. As part of Perry Farrell's deal with BMG, did you have absolute control over deciding who was going to be part of this new album? And was this project and names discussed beforehand?
Absolutely not. He brought the record to us. It was the easiest project ever.
It was a finished master.
Absolutely. And that happens quite a lot lately. Much more than it used to. It used to really be that you'd start the record with them, but now oftentimes a finished record will walk in the door. I know Tony well, and I'm really glad it walked in the door because he costs a fortune.
Okay. Kaylee wants to ask you this. When it comes to your success concerning the supergroup, Kind Heaven Orchestra, what has been the biggest challenge involving the integration of different musicians who've never worked together before? And were you able to ease the process with any specific skills or knowledge?
Same answer. Now the thing with this though is that in the going forward with Perry Farrell, and you'll know this, he's like a crazy genius. He has so many ideas that now he's putting back together. He's thinking about putting back together Jane's Addiction and putting back together like all his bands and having each one open for the other. So that's something that I am going to have to get in the middle of in terms of the logistics of that. That's going to be interesting. And you just deal with problems as they arise. You really do.
So outside of your A&R skills on the audio level, Ashley picked up on the fact that, well, how does your process with documentaries, such as the Joan Jett one, differ from working books or other things? And are you involved with filming, or do you come in closer to the end?
Now what happens is...
Because you're not supposed to be in the film business. You promised you weren't.
I swore.
You said you were going to do that.
The thing about BMG is that it's like a playground. They are a multimedia company. So they have books, they have records, they have publishing, they have documentaries, we have theater. And I get very bored very easily. So having done this for a very long time, the only thing that keeps me sane is to keep learning. learning, something new. So I'd never ever, for example, with books, been involved with books, but I had a dream about publishing books. And we started a book division, mainly music focused, and I knew nothing about it and just started asking people if they wanted to write a book, or if they had a book, or they had an idea for a book, and they'd say yes or no, and if they said yes, I'm like, great, let's do it. And then I learned how to do the deals, which are really interesting deals. You just ask people. With the documentary, I was looking after Joan as her point person, and her manager, Carrie Ann Brinkman, who's Kenny Laguna's daughter, and Kenny wrote I Love Rock and Roll and all of those songs, and is her manager and kind of dad. They're really, really close family. I talked to Carrie Ann about a documentary. I said she really needs to do one. She has an incredibly interesting story. Nobody would sign her, so she had to start her own label. She was one of the first women rock and roll grungy bands. She went through not being taken that seriously, and then she suddenly was, and now she's got the Grammy, and I mean, she's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as of a couple of years ago, and she just has a fascinating story. So I brought it in, and this woman, Kathy Dahm, who does documentaries every day, like that's her department, I went and convinced her to work with Carrie Ann and me to get this to happen. So I went in very, very, very early and then stepped back, so it was the other way around. Kind of like A&R.
Okay, so now I want to play with you free association.
Oh no. It'll be really messy. Okay.
Nah. Okay.
Can I look at ink blots or something?
I'll throw a name at you.
Okay.
The Orwells.
Oh, those poor boys. I signed a band called the Orwells. They were out of Chicago. They did really, really, really well on their first record. Great writers. Very young. I signed them at the age of 16. They were still in high school. The lead singer, Mario Cuomo, was the oldest one in the band. I was their publisher. They made 2 records. Both did really well. I was about to sign them for a record, like when we opened our record side. And suddenly somebody started a Google document online saying that these girls had been raped by them. So the woman who started the Google document, it's a long, long story, but she'd never even met the band. And she said she'd been raped by them. So their lives, they, I think, had sex with girls when they were all underage in high school, which means that everyone in my kids' high school would be in jail right now. But it's none of the girls went to the police. None of the girls told their parents. They didn't go to court. And I don't know what happened. I wasn't there. But I'm the first person to say, you know, how dare you? This is terrible. You should go to jail. I believe these boys. I really do. Which is really hard for me to, but I actually believe that it's gray. It's not black and white. But their careers have been destroyed. We cannot sign them. And they are waiting because everything is being knocked down like dominoes. And they're waiting, and they're going to sue these kids for tortures, or for interference of their being able to make a living, whatever that's called. And yeah, for stopping their careers. But these kids will have to live for the rest of their lives, these teenagers, with that label and with that online. And this woman then started a site where she said, anybody from any town, any local band, have you as a teenager had sex with these bands? And these are all like teenage bands. So it's a very, very interesting, gray, weird place for these groups right now. And they have to be very, very, very careful because it can really come back and bite them for the rest of their lives.
Okay, on a more positive note, Mercury Rev.
Aww. I worked with Mercury Rev when I started at V2. We made 2 of their best records. They live in Woodstock, which is where I live. They've known each other since they were in high school. They still make great records. I don't know if any of you have heard Mercury Rev, but if you haven't, you should go listen. It's amazing, orchestral, beautiful music. And the band have been together forever and will always be together. They're like brothers. They're the true essence of a group that will stick together and just has that chemistry. And every record gets better.
Brenda K. Starr.
Brenda was at MCA, and Brenda wrote the first or the second hit that Mariah Carey had. She had it on her record, I Believe it was called. And she gave it to Mariah Carey, and that's who had the hit with it. But Brenda did quite well. She was the pop singer that I couldn't remember the name of. And the first time that I actually got involved with co-writes.
Okay, what about Jeff Buckley?
I met Jeff Buckley I heard some of his music. Somebody sent it to me, and I flew him in from Los Angeles. He's Tim Buckley's son, who is a hero of mine. He showed up from LA in the clothes that he was wearing and didn't have a guitar, so we bought him a guitar. I was at Imago at the time. He did a show at St. Anne's, very famous show. And after that, just sort of exploded for him. He played this club in the East Village, which no longer exists, called Chenet, which was this wonderful club where people would come, famous, not famous. Jeff was the dishwasher, and he would play every night and just have fun and take requests. And we became good friends. He died. He drowned in the Mississippi. Nobody knows for sure if it was a mistake or not. I think it was a mistake, an accident. But he was a truly talented guy, and you should definitely listen to his music. Career was really cut short.
Tell us about Moby.
Moby was a vegan. Moby, I'm just, you said throw this out, so I'm just throwing it out. I signed Moby when he did a record. I was driving on Route 28 going upstate, and DST, which is our local station, was playing this music, and it was very bizarre. It was like field songs, recordings, with gospel music and beats. And I'd never quite heard anything like it. So it was amazing. So I pulled over and I called the station and said, what the hell is this? And they said, it's Moby. And I knew Moby because he'd been a dance, doing his dance stuff. So I called him up right away and I said, I want to do this record with you, whatever the hell this thing is. And so I was at V2. I signed him. Everybody thought wasn't going to do anything because it was so bizarre and never played, would never get on the radio. Nothing would ever happen to it. It became the most synced album in history to this day. I think each track has been synced at least 30 times. And it sold about 5 million copies or something, and was in every restaurant, every radio station, every clothing store, to the point where I was literally like running out of places because I couldn't bear to hear it anymore. I mean, it was just like I couldn't sleep. It was like, not again. Anyway, that's the story of Moby.
I could go on with other associations, but I want to, in the remaining time, and you've been generous enough to stay a little later than normal. Are there questions from the class that we haven't covered that you might have that you want to ask? Yes, sir.
Question about competition.
Yeah.
Because I guess BMG would be maybe considered the fourth major label group nowadays.
Yes.
So if you're competing against a Warner or a Sony or Universal,
Yes.
what do you say about BMG and about you that would convince somebody to sign with you instead of one of the others?
We don't compete. We don't get involved in bidding wars. So there's a certain point when Universal's always, or Interscope, or one of those companies, Sony, is going to beat us out, because BMG are very frugal. So it used to be that if you were the first person to discover a band, like I'll give you an example, Billie Eilish. Like, I found Billie like 3 years ago. And we didn't offer her enough of a deal. Then this year, BMG came back and offered her a huge deal. They were waiting to see if it would do well. Sony came in and kept upping the deal until we backed out, because BMG will never overspend. They're very strict with it. They're German, not that, but it's not a game that they will play as a company. And I don't like to do bidding wars. I figure if I'm in a bidding war, I'm too late. That's just the way I look at it.
Any other questions? Or do I throw out some more? Okay, I'll throw another one.
Yeah.
Does somebody-
For someone who's not sure of what they specifically want to do yet, like in the future,
Yeah.
besides internships, like after like you're close to graduation, do you have any advice of how to figure out like what is your specific thing out of like the 3 things you're trying to figure out you want to do, if that makes sense?
Tell me what they are.
Okay, management, working in marketing, or doing some type of like touring.
Tour management, or
Yeah.
tour, like being an agent?
Yeah, like agency, like booking, like touring wise.
Okay. I would recommend that you go and work for each company, like get an internship at each one, and see which one you enjoy.
After like the internship phase though?
Yes.
What would you recommend then? Because I did some internships and I'm graduating now. So
Which did you prefer?
I didn't do any with the touring or booking side. I did ones with like other things that I realized I didn't
Right.
want to do.
You don't want to do management.
No. Like I did one with like streaming and I realized that wasn't for me, like the sales side.
Right.
So I haven't done anything with the touring or booking side, but I realized that's something I might be very interested in. So I'm wondering how now.
I would get an internship, but you're graduating, so you can't.
Yeah.
I
That's what I'm trying
would
to
get a temporary position, like go to a company. There are companies that hire out, so you can get some sort of a temp position, even if it's
Yes.
just being an assistant, so that you can see what happens in the company. Booking agents are great. I mean, they do really well. That's where all the money's being made, or most of it nowadays. management, you could go work for one of many managers, and I can totally give you some introductions if you need them. It's a thankless job. It really is a thankless job, unless you are so lucky and you start managing like a Lady Gaga or whatever. It can work. I mean, I have a friend called Karen Giese, and she manages Pharrell. And before that, she was just, working, doing marketing at one of the companies I worked at. It can work, but it is a tough one. The marketing, is that the other one?
Yeah.
And
I mean, that I have experience in. That was just like one of the ones I'm not sure if I want to continue with that
Yeah.
or try for the ones that I don't have experience in that I'm
Right.
more interested
Well,
in.
I mean, it depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking for security, management is not the one.
Yeah.
Because you can get fired quickly. Because you didn't do anything or because they succeeded by themselves. Okay,
Right.
so not very secure. Booking agent can be very secure. People work at agencies for a long time. You get to go see a lot of music. You get to take chances on bands, kind of like A&R. And they'll probably hand you some bands to see, to get you going. And they'll train you. There's big agencies, there's small agencies, so you can kind of pick what you like to fit into. And the marketing, I guess you don't really want to do.
That's like my safety net right now, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I don't necessarily believe marketing, apart from promotion, radio, is anything other than going and buying oranges. Because honestly, I think that a record is a great record and hits or doesn't. You can do as much marketing as you want, but if it's not great, it's not going to happen. It may help it stand out from other things, but that's about it.
Thank you.
Anyone else? No? Okay, well, I want to thank Kate for giving up her evening and